Pain is a fire. And that is the energy we'll be bringing you here today on a very special episode of Recorded Neutral Territory. Brian, I can't do it. I can't do it anymore. We're so excited to talk to you guys about 12 months. Is there anything else you want to say before we get started?
In the immortal words of everyone's favorite Dresden, pew, pew, pew.
Welcome one, welcome all, welcome to Recorded Neutral Territory, where the spoilers finally go all the way through 12 months. I'm Adam Russo, and with me, as always, is a child lining up for their first day at a supernatural school for gifted children. It's Brian O'Reilly.
Oh, I'm so happy to be waiting at platform 9 3/4 for... Oh, did that man's face just turn into a muzzle, and is he eating a corpse? Chicago's horrible.
Don't worry about it. The wardens will take care of it. They're like Aurors. Just, go talk to your pen pal from St. Mark's. But in the meantime, let's talk about 12 months, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, this is going to be a spoiler-filled episode, so please don't listen to it unless you are ready to learn more about what happens in that book and our speculations about what will happen in future books based on the new lore that we learned about in this book. We did just have a patron episode, a bonus episode where we talked about a lot of our favorite parts and plot details of 12 months. That is exclusively for patrons. But today we're talking about the more important stuff, the lore stuff, and we're going to start with the smaller stuff and ramp our way up to the larger stuff. So first, let's start with Brian. Toot Toot is now 3 feet tall. How on earth is he hiding from people anymore?
It's got to be the case that just all pixies actually veil themselves most of the time, right? That's just got to be the case.
I think so too, because they always sort of described as like having that blinking light thing, but they must turn that off when they don't want to be seen by mortals, or maybe it's something that can only be seen by non-mortals or something like that. But man, 3 feet tall is crazy. Obviously, a lot of people called this a while back when he first started getting bigger. And I think we're pretty close to the point where something specific is going to happen. He can't just keep being what he is.
I doubt it'll happen in Mirror Mirror. But I imagine the book after that, something's got to give with
Agreed.
Harry and the Pixies. Like, they need to either become sort of formally some thing in the Winter Court, or they need to become their own thing separate from the Winter Court. It can't keep being this weird hybrid joke. It needs to at some point be something that we can sort of have a measure of as we get towards the bat.
Yeah, not only that, physical changes, but if you've read Little Things, you know that Toot is actually having a hard time connecting with his other Dewdrop Fairy friends, even the ones in the guard, because he now understands and thinks about death. Specifically in relation to Murphy, right? He's like, oh my, yeah, the Zalord is still sad about the death of his woman, and to like internal monologue, I can't talk about that with the other fairies because they don't understand, right?
Right.
So he's starting, even back when we first met him, he was like Harry said, oh yeah, they forget 2 seconds after they tell you what they're going to do, right? They just like, they have the brain of a goldfish or whatever. But throughout the series, Toot has become more and more reliable over longer and longer periods of time. So even before we got to that reference in Little Things, he has clearly been mentally shifting towards, or at least away from, the sort of absent-minded Dewdrop Fairy situation.
Yeah, I think it is certainly clear that Jim has a plan in mind for where he's going to bring Toot, and the shoe's got to drop soon or it's not going to have a chance to.
Yeah. All right. The next thing we want to cover real quick, Bob is a failed experiment, Brian. If that's the case, what was the original goal? If he's a failure, what was Etienne the Enchanter trying to do?
Well, he's a failure from the perspective of Basil.
That's
so, that could just mean that Bob has a mind of his own, frankly. I mean, it could mean any number of things.
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting interpretation. He was supposed to just be like a essentially computer search that had no personality, and he's a failure because it turned out he absorbs the personality of the person that he's working for. I could see that because Basil kind of does. I was also happy to, like, the first few times I read the word, I was like, is it Basil? Is it Basil? No, it's a name. It must be Basil, right? And then eventually when they started revealing the other ones, thyme and cinnamon, I'm like, oh, it is Basil.
Yeah.
I threw this one in here. We didn't prep for this, Brian, because Daniel in the chat asked, does Maggie know Thomas is her uncle? And if so, or even if not, does she know he's a vampire?
So I don't think she knows that he is a vampire. She might know that he can do stuff, that he has abilities
right.
that most humans don't. And I don't think that and this is where I'm really unsure, I don't think that she knows that Thomas is her uncle, because I think Harry is keeping that so close to the chest that he won't tell her until she is old enough to understand the gravity of that secret.
That was my interpretation. Yeah, he would not risk telling her because then she might accidentally say it when somebody's around, like is Uncle Thomas coming over? And then,
right.
Not Ebenezer, but Carlos or something is in earshot, and he goes, wait, what?
Or she says it to Bonnie, and then Bonnie has no filter. And,
exactly. Right. So that's I 100% agree that those are the case. But, the only argument against that is, like, she cared that Thomas didn't come to see her, and that's something that you expect from potentially family. But the other answer to that is maybe she just, like, he's the only other adult that made friends with her besides Molly and the Carpenters, and so she did care that he did. I made him pancakes, and then my heart broke. Anyway, let's move on. The Brotherhood of St. Brigid. Now, I did have to look this up because I am not a computer like Bob, but St. Brigid is a classical Irish saint along with Patrick and Columba. I think you had a hypothesis about the Brotherhood of St. Brigid, and specifically St. Brigid herself within the context of the Dresden verse.
Yes. So there's a bit of an academic debate over whether or not St. Brigid is a historical person. Some people think that she is, and there are good arguments to believe that she is. And it might be that she is, but it is also possible that St. Brigid is a conflation of the Irish goddess Brigid from the pagan period. Brigid is one of the big Irish goddesses. She's sort of weirdly absent otherwise from the Christianization of Irish myths that happen. Like Cuchulainn and Finn McCool, they sort of work as folk tales because they've been altered in their sort of demigod status, maybe, in a post-Christian Ireland. Brigid sort of doesn't exist in that way unless there's this saint, or, the she in Ireland, they're no longer gods. They're these people of the mounds, the Aushi, who are sort of this echo of this pagan belief in gods. That's how we get fairies, right? That's at least one interpretation anthropologically of how we get fairies. So if Saint Brigid, is the goddess Brigid, that goddess is associated with fire and Beltane, the festival of sort of springtime and summer.
Ah, so that sounds like the Sealy Court.
Exactly. So it's very possible that is in fact the name for Mother Summer that is sort of most strongly associated with the creation of the Fae courts, just like people have guessed that a Scottish winter hag, the Cailleach or Beora, I think might be the other name, is sort of the progenitor of the Mother Winter figure.
They both have multiple names that they had attributed to themselves, almost like different mantles that they had worn over time.
Yeah, they're definitely she's got the iron teeth of Baba Yaga, so Mother Winter is definitely wearing that one for sure. But it's just possible they're taking from lots of places. And if Brigid is a name for Mother Summer, well, then the Brotherhood of St. Brigid might be, in a way, Summer's answer to Winter bringing the White Court under its aegis. That the Summer Court is actually stepping up its co-option of some mortal organizations in order to balance the increased presence of Winter in mortal affairs.
Yeah, and as Michael said, quote, the Brotherhood of St. Brigid, it's a bit of an ad hoc organization formed when there is need to battle rampant darkness, unquote. So that also kind of suggests a more summary connection. Usually the rampant darkness in the Dresden Files world is something more associated with winter.
And we're not trying to say necessarily that it's sort of like Father Forthill is dumb and he doesn't know he's working for Mother Summer. It's a little bit of the white god is, to a certain extent, allowing Summer to act through some of his agents, maybe, because of the special circumstances.
Yeah, and as you had pointed out, Harry is getting pretty big power-ups as the Winter Knight and glomping on the White Court in its entirety to Winter, which suggests something must balance that. The Summer has to get some other group to join them as a result. We're going to speculate about that, too, when we get there. Now, what's next for the Brotherhood of St. Brigid? They're now a new sort of minor power in the city that's kind of taking the place of what the Alphas used to do.
I mean, just on a larger scale, right? There's more of them. They're sort of using greater firepower. I mean, they can't transform into wolves, but they have assault rifles.
Yeah.
So they're definitely, at least in Chicago, while the city is in a state of disarray, going to be a fairly significant organization. And, you know, we haven't seen really in 12 months the Paranet come into its own in any meaningful sense. And maybe it just won't. But we've got a lot of hints of parallel organizations that are all trying to do the same thing. The Brotherhood of St. Brigid, the Paranet, they're all sort of pushing back against supernatural predators so that people who were clued in but not of White Council status or anything have some protection against the, you know, depredations of the Winter Court or ghouls or whatever. So at some point it would be logical for these groups to start working together more closely and to band together in a more meaningful way. We just haven't seen it.
Yeah, and the other thing that occurred to me while reading about them is in the book, I believe Daniel refers to himself as Brother Captain, and I just couldn't stop hearing that in every 40K game I've ever played.
I mean, it's interesting because it's explicitly a religious almost frame of reference. It sounds like a crusading order, like the Knights Templar or the Teutonic Knights or something.
And I'm sure
like
that's
that.
where the 40K lore took those kinds of, you know, wording.
But that's very interesting because that's normally not an organization that you portray very positively.
That's true.
Media.
That's true. So this is like Jim's twist on it in the same way that you have his twist on paladins and other things in here. This is his twist on a crusading organization, especially one led by a carpenter is probably going to be, you know, not a terrible one.
That's the interesting thing. Are we going to see other chapters that are maybe not as, you know, they're led by people like Carl as opposed to people like Daniel?
Yeah, that is an interesting question. I was wondering mostly like, okay, did they just pop up for this book? And like now that the city's put back together again and the police are going to get a better and better hold on things, are they going to just go away? No, I'm pretty sure that they are still going to just be in the periphery and Jim's going to maybe tap them when he needs that kind of a group to show up, maybe for an impromptu rescue when Harry needs them or to, you know, do something else. There's a million things that he could use that group for in the future, even as like a potential like antagonist against Harry as needed. So there's a lot of possibility.
It's a lot of work characterizing Daniel Carpenter if you're not going to use him for something in the future.
That's a very good point too. So yeah, I could definitely see that. All right, let's talk about Will and the other power-ups, by which I mean we really only have one potential additional observable evidence, and that's Fitz. So specifically, Will is described, basically points out to Harry that he can heal way faster than he used to be able to do. And he says that has started since the battle, like that something in the battle has juiced up his ability to use his power. And Fitz obviously mentioned that his non-ectomancy power became available during the battle. What's your explanation for this? What happened here?
So I think it's important to note that not only does Will have this additional healing factor, he is basically Wolverine because he's clearly stronger in his human form. He does combat training with the Winter Knight. Harry is like a world record power lifter at this point, kind of by accident. So the fact that Will can hang with him and just, take blows from a guy who, first of all, it just in normal, without considering any power-ups, is just a 6'9" dude who works out religiously and not even get bruises and, heal them instantly. But also that it's the Winter Knight and he can hold his own against him as a sparring partner.
That's true.
Definitely means that
he's got to be faster and stronger even than he used to be when he was just doing his regular human training.
Right. So Will has in some way become a little bit less of a Dresden Files werewolf and a little bit more of a classic wolfman.
Yeah.
He has some additional strength and durability that is outside of just his ability to turn into a wolf. Now, that's interesting, but I think the reason why Jim actually brings that into the book is so it doesn't seem as convenient that Fitz also gets a power-up from the battle.
Okay. And he also has, once he's introduced this little thing, he can then introduce other characters in the future that got powered up during the battle for plot conveniences here and there. But how did all this work? I'm kind of thinking that something about Mab pushing everyone combined with the magical potential energy in the air probably allowed it to unlock everyone's maximum magical potential. But does that mean that we also maybe have people that didn't have powers before and maybe now they just are low-level practitioners?
So I think that's really interesting because one possibility is that the amount of power floating around in the air and the ability to connect more easily to the Never Never means if you had that connection already, the door is a little wider for you. If you, during the battle, reached out for more power, it's not that you can get all of that now, but you widened your own access permanently. That's one possibility, and I think that's the explanation that sort of makes the most sense in universe. However, it could be that all humans, because when you dream, you visit the Never Never, have some connection to this power. So we could just have an explosion of minor practitioners in Chicago. And more importantly, if it was something that was easily to do unconsciously, it might be the case that several members of the Ordo Lebes are now near White Council level talents or something.
I mean, we're about to talk about Bock and that group and the barbed wire spell. Maybe that group couldn't have pulled it off before Battleground.
As far as we know, Bock didn't have talent in any sense. So this might be a little bit of a retcon that Bock has a certain level of talent. But I think it might be Jim sprinkling in exactly that notion that you're talking about, that all of the members of that circle can throw around this curse now because the battle happened in Chicago.
Yeah, and we know it didn't really universally impact everyone because Mort doesn't mention that, oh, I'm also able to do all this stuff. I think that would be an obvious point to say, or maybe he can. Maybe he's now White Council material, but he doesn't want to tell anybody. That's also possible and in character. But and to that end, do we then ask ourselves, hey, did Harry also get an upgrade? And by the end of this book, you got to say, maybe he did, because he does some crazy stuff in this book that you don't know for sure wasn't something he could have done prior to Battleground. Now, the other explanation for that is that, like when he was training Molly, he refines the fundamentals while training Fitz. And maybe that has something to do with how strong he is by the end of this book as well. It could be a little both.
And I would suspect that, as a rule, if you were a practitioner in Chicago during the battle, you did not get any stronger. But I think that if you tried to fight and reached out for power to do so, and reached out for power that you didn't know you had or didn't really have, there was at least a chance that you gained some permanent access to that power. So a lot of people probably attempted things like that. A few of them probably survived. And for those people, it is a fact that they have more access to those magical energies now.
Yeah, that makes sense too. And if Bock and his group gained anything from it, maybe it was because they were working together to try to strengthen defensive wards around a house that they were hiding in, like one of the Paranet strong points that they were talking about. We know that Max was one of those points, but they had other points throughout the city that had been reinforced and strengthened with the barn raising of wards. And maybe they were in there just concentrating on keeping those wards up while the huntsman tried to break down it or something. And that was when they were exposed to that kind of a power-up.
And we don't necessarily know if it was Bock who grew in power. Like I said, I don't think him having talent is mentioned, but maybe it's just that member of the Ordo Lebes, I don't remember her name, who is a part of the circle, and she is more talented now and is the one who's really fueling the spells or something. You know, we don't know enough about that group. We don't really get an inside look at them, but certainly could one or two of the people in that circle be more powerful than they were before the battle because they did something during it? Certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's talk about Bock and how disappointed I am in him. But specifically, the barbed wire spell, Brian, Harry calls it a curse. We were just talking about that like 2 weeks ago, and we finally get the answer. Harry calls it a curse. There it is. Answer for, we spent, 20 minutes trying to figure that out?
Oh my gosh. Just like all of our, and the whole thing about, does he need to manipulate it physically? Well, apparently, sort of.
Yeah.
But
we just, okay, what would Harry do if he was, a later version? No, he would basically do the same thing. He would rip it out with his hands made out of will.
Now, it does seem like he handled things a little bit differently this time around, and he didn't need to throw it outside. They threw it into that holy fire, which seemed a lot smarter. He definitely had a better handle on how to safely remove the spell without endangering himself, which may be from just greater knowledge, but I might also be because his approach did seem to be somewhat different when he was removing the spell. He seemed to be able to do it in a more careful manner.
Yeah, and he had the aid of being in the church, which they specifically called out as like providing some kind of surcease or some kind of temporary treatment to those suffering under it. So that certainly helped him out a little bit. But I got to ask you, Brian, how did Bock get his hand on Kravos' Book of Shadows? I believe Harry was the last one who had it.
So when you originally asked this question in our pre-show, I was really confused because I thought Harry read the book at the police station when Stallings gave it to him and left it with Stallings. And in that case, it was in police evidence and, somebody...
Anybody could have gotten it, yeah.
Right. But it does seem that Harry brought the book home. So a couple things could have happened. One is just that there was a second book. Another possibility is that Harry kept it. And after his house burned down, whoever went through his basement sold off a lot of his paraphernalia. Or it could be the case that at some point during grave peril, the book was actually pilfered from Harry's place by the nightmare or something in some scene that we don't get. I don't think that's very likely, but I suppose there's a possibility that somebody sought out the book and took it from Harry's house.
Yeah, and there was, in 12 months, Harry speculates that there was a cultist apprentice of Kravos that they missed, and that person wrote down something, and that's where this book came from. The other option is, we have a pretty solid guess that Mavra and Bianca were the ones that taught Kravos this spell, and maybe they taught somebody else who wrote it down.
Sure. It's also possible that this isn't even Kravos' Book of Shadows at all.
Right.
It's just a different one that contains the same spell and is bound in the same way because, as you're saying, Bianca and Mavra planted a bunch of seeds with a bunch of little sorcerers, and this is just the latest one to germinate.
And I hate to say it, But I did get an interesting parallel in my head, because what happened here, the Ordo, Lebes, and Bock, they found this book, they found this spell, and in the book it said, oh, this inconveniences. And Harry's like, yeah, inconveniences them into a freaking death coma. Like, what are you talking about? And Brian, if that isn't what happens in Harry Potter,
Four enemies.
Four enemies is exactly what I was thinking of. And wow, that I don't know if Jim was doing that on purpose or if it's just a useful trope, but that seems to be an interesting parallel. So the disappointing thing here is that we don't want Bock to be the bad guy. We like Bock, right? But obviously, this is what happened. I am really happy with how this turned out, though. But what do you think about the way that Harry handled this with the wardens? Are they going to come back to Chicago and try this again if they ever detect black magic?
Well, the most interesting thing about the confrontation with the wardens is Molly, which I suppose we should talk about briefly. But to answer that first question, I think that if anyone ever sensed anything like this again, the wardens would come and attempt to take care of it, and Harry would be in trouble for sticking his neck out, and he would also be very disappointed in the people who, were casting the curse. I think, though, that we've seen already that Bock is a overly defensive person. He bans Harry from his bookstore for really no good reason. I mean, I understand that he breaks a lot of stuff, but it's not Harry's fault, fundamentally.
Right.
It just seems that that's kind of up Bock's alley. We don't want him to be that kind of person, but he is. I think that the simultaneous Harry threatening them and also Molly pulling out basically all the stops to get everybody to stand in line was really, really cool. I think it's all veiled threats and illusions from her in that scene, but they're so good, even Harry can't tell to what extent she's being perfectly straight.
Right. And because we know that fairy queens can't lie, I think the accords that she pulls out and like, hey, you're violating someone else's territory. And like, yeah, but we do that all the time. Is like not a good excuse.
Right.
Now, I mean, Harry's explanation of like, yeah, everybody just lets the wardens do their thing because nobody wants a warlock in their territory, right? So that makes perfect sense to me. But Molly being able to say, yeah, but you need Form XYZ to come here officially, and I'm enforcing that particular clause right now. It was perfect. And the way she does it definitely felt like channeling Maeve, right? She was, I mean, I believe the way it was described is she looked a little crazy-eyed and things like that.
Well, I love the thing about the shadows of the goblin bodyguards in the alleyway. That's a real either, and Harry's not sure. Is she bringing around goblin bodyguards?
I mean, that's her rag lady move, right?
That's exactly what it reminded me of. That this is Molly using illusion in a way that's so convincing that it even takes Harry in, because she's learned so much about how to be intimidating so that she doesn't have to be violent.
Yes, and that's kind of what she mentions in one of their conversations here. Like Harry said, have you had to deal with people trying to, test you? And she's like, not since this. And it could have been the name of the person.
Not since on Alaska. No.
On Alaska, that's right. You know what? Right. I've never seen that written down because I only listened to the audiobook of it. So that's Cold Case is what they're talking about then, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Yes, I understand now. So on Alaska, it was such a weird spelling of that.
It's the sort of only spelling of that, but I will say, looking at it on paper, I had the exact same reaction, which I was like, what does that say? And then I'm sitting there sounding it out. Oh, that's just what Alaska looks like when the first letter is not a capital. Right, brain. Yeah, we got it. Alaska? Yeah. But the great thing about that scene is that it also shows that Ilyana is not just a head case.
Mm-hmm.
She can believe that discretion is the better part of valor. She is willing to try to live to fight another day.
It helps that the older wardens on her team kind of suggest that she back down. It does make me wonder why she's leading the team with these older wardens, except that she must have combat experience during the war too, right? Because we know, for those of you that weren't aware, if you reread KotB Wizardry from Brief Cases, it's a short story where Harry's in front of a class of baby wardens providing life experience and using the 4 A's of wardening. And she is named there, Ileana, and that's one of the reasons that he remembers her, and he calls her by name when she shows up. He doesn't have to be introduced.
I think that to a large extent, a lot of the older wardens are assigned to sort of the strike team at Edinburgh. You know, they're the standing army of the White Council, and they are garrisoned together. And Ileana's job is regional commander of Chicago.
Right,
She's
that's
got
true.
Harry's old gig. So they're sort of there to enforce her will as the regional commander, even though they have a lot of seniority over her, mostly because the older wardens don't really want to be the regional commander of Chicago for a lot of reasons.
And the White Council wants the most battle-hardened available as quick reinforcements for major situations. They don't want them tied down as the warden of a specific area like that. That makes sense to me. Ileana's job would be, like Harry's job was, investigate and call for backup if you need it. And that's not something you want your heaviest hitters. Like, you don't want to put Ebenezar in that job.
Right, precisely. And it just so happens to be the case that, whether this was always true or not, it does seem to be the case that Morgan may have been a regional commander of somewhere in North America, or some kind of...
Or maybe he was, like, not a regional commander, a like man-to-man commander. Like, his job was literally Dresden for a while. But yeah, after that, I don't know if he was still keeping tabs on him after Stormfront in the same capacity as he was then.
But the point is that regardless of exactly what Morgan's job was, after a few years of the War with the Red Court, the amount of battle-hardened wardens left dropped precipitously.
Yeah.
So it makes a lot of sense at this point to let the kids handle the regional command posts and keep the older, more experienced wardens where they can all sort of travel as a group to, you know, the needed location for reinforcement. So that's probably why Ileana or someone like her would get the job. And then she got it specifically, as we talked about in the Patreon show, probably because Lucio simultaneously wanted to send someone to Chicago who would be a hard ass to Harry in case he did go to the dark side, but also who Harry could maybe teach a little nuance to.
Yeah.
Because obviously Ileana has a very black and white view of black magic, and it's not really compatible with reality.
Yeah, I mean, even in that second time she shows up, she's certain that if she touches Dresden, she's going to sense black magic, and then it'll be all over, and she's going to be proven right and vindicated, and then when she doesn't, she's stunned. She's like, she didn't consider this possibility, but then still you have to wonder, okay, say you sensed black magic on him and he knew that's what you were doing. What happens next, Ileana? You didn't think that all the way through. The warlock that is you're better in experience and power can now jump you knowing that you know his secret. Maybe not the best plan. She does have to learn a little bit more there.
I also think Ileana might just not actually know the extent to which she's outclassed.
Yeah, she might not believe, like, she thinks it's all exaggerations for the new person, or he can't be that bad, whatever.
She maybe was not apprenticed to someone like Ebenezar. Like,
right.
Harry has known since day one the sort of outer limits and capabilities of magic. Ileana might not realize that the Winter Night could literally turn her into an icicle in a second.
Yeah. Now, that brings me back to what do we expect of their sort of engagements in the future? I do think she'll return. Again, Mirror Mirror is such a weird book because we know Harry is leaving for a good chunk of it to go into an alternate reality. So it's very hard to predict what will be in that book. But I think in a future book, she will continue to show up, and it might just be Jim like, hey, I need a side story to go along with this main story. Let's have some more black magic show up in Chicago and get something going on between Harry and Ileana again and see what brews, right? That is definitely somewhere she could fit in as one of those B stories that take place that get in Harry's way, but are still important to Harry, and he still has to drag his ass to save somebody in that story while waiting to go on his duel with Ortega or whatever.
Well, part of the reason I was speculating that we might see other minor practitioners who have had a power-up since the battle is to give Ileana something to do.
Oh, and another way for her to interact with Dresden, yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised if actually at some point Ileana and Dresden end up working together to take care of some Chicago sorcerer, and that's sort of the turning point for her to realize, oh, I don't know why we kicked Dresden out of the council, but he's really not such a bad guy.
Yeah, I could definitely see that, where he finds out about more black magic happening in his town. Maybe somebody tips him off. Maybe he stumbles upon it himself. Maybe Bob comes back and says, hey, the black magic detectors are going off crazy in the castle. It must be right down the block or whatever. And then Harry just calls up them and says, yeah, I've investigated this. It's bad. You're going to have to come do your thing. And they're like, what do you mean? Don't you protect... Ileana says, don't you protect warlocks? What kind of trap is this? And he's like, no. And of course, it has to be as bad as like that Korean kid, right?
Right.
In order for Harry to say, this is irredeemable, nothing we can do here. And she then has to reconcile that. That would be a very cool sort of story to tell.
Yeah, or it's a situation where Harry calls Carlos because, hey, I found a sorcerer who is, heading up a cult, something similar to Fitz's old master, Ordo Kravos or something. And, I want somebody to give me a hand taking it down. And rather than showing up, Carlos just sends Ileana because it's her territory. And he's like, you guys have to develop a working relationship, Harry. Sorry.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. Okay, so let's move on. Ileana, very interesting new development. I want to see how she develops. Hopefully she's not going to stay as one-dimensional as Morgan did for so long. Morgan never really became two-dimensional until Turncoat, and he really became three-dimensional when you read that microfiction. And that's like such a little amount to give him 3 dimensions.
Well, I agree on the one hand, but on the other hand, Morgan I think it's Proven Guilty. Yeah, Proven Guilty, when he seems to be very hesitant about killing Molly. That is a big step forward. And in Deadbeat, when we see, he's got a thing for Lucio, in that scene.
That's fair.
It's a very slow build. And Morgan is a very sort of one-note character for a while, but Jim adds depth to him basically every time we see him after the first couple books. Ileana does not have that much time to have depth added to her. So hopefully Jim fleshes out her character quickly, or we just don't see very much of her.
Yeah, she kind of did her point here for this is to act as a bit of a sort of antagonist for Dresden in the middle of the book when there's nobody else really antagonizing him. Carlos isn't. Ebenezer doesn't even really. Moving on, though, Murphy's Shade shows up here, and I thought it was written really interestingly. When she first shows up, you don't even know that it's her for sure. Like, I speculated on it, and then later on it's confirmed. But I thought it was really brilliant how Jim had Murphy's Shade have enough self-awareness to know that it was not Murphy, that it was not her, that it's a copy of her, and to force Dresden to acknowledge that while talking to him. And you came up with a hypothesis of maybe why that is.
Right. I think this has to be true because it sort of is the only thing that works with the rest of the world building that Jim has done. We know that for spirits like Agatha Hagglethorne, who we're dealing with right now in grave peril, not only do they not know that they're dead, they don't think of themselves as being distinct from the person who left the shade, even though Harry makes it clear that they are. So is Murphy's shade different just because Murphy was so cool? Well, maybe. Or maybe when we later find out that Fitz and Mort have sort of had their thumb on the scale, noticed what Harry has been doing, and have been trying to help him out, the way they did that was as ectomancers to call up the shade and, in the same way that Sir Stuart knows that he's a ghost, tell Murphy's shade what the actual sort of reality of the situation is.
And that seems to be one of the things that Mort does professionally. He doesn't get paid for it, I don't think, but he seems to think like in the same way that Dresden's like, I've got power, I should use it. I think Mort really idealized and admired that about Dresden. And the one thing he can do is put spirits to rest. He can kind of give spirits therapy until they finally move on to whatever's next or dissipate or whatever. And we know that he did that for a lot of spirits, and the ones he couldn't do that for, like the Lectors and the other sort of crazy spirits that were around his house in Ghost Story, those ones he kept with him so they wouldn't cause anybody any trouble. So we already know he does sort of spirit therapy, so it makes sense that he would do that for Murphy. We know that she showed up to him at some point before, probably before she showed up to Dresden and he called her up, because Mort mentions it very early on when Fitz comes over, and then later admits, yeah, I did that because I knew Murphy's shade was around and I wanted to keep tabs on you because sometimes the living can kind of hold on to them for too long and keep them here. And that was such a cool scene where Mort shows up with beers at the end when he finally learns that Harry's let go. I could totally see her like getting Harry saying goodbye. She leaves. She winds up going over to Mort's and saying goodbye to him and explaining that Harry's finally letting her go. And then Mort just shows up the next day like, congrats, buddy. That was just such a touching moment.
It was great. And it was also great because it is a continual evolution of Mort's character. The Mort that we leave at the end of Ghost Story is not a heroic figure in the same sense that Dresden is, but he is a hero. He's been doing all of this work to keep the city safe. He takes it very seriously, and he's using his power for good. And in this way, he's engaging with Dresden not just as a peer, but as somebody who has a specialty that, can do things that Harry doesn't ask him to do and can sort of have his own agency in shaping the future. And how does he do it? He does it in a way to keep Harry sane, which is really, I think just a wonderful, what does Harry do for Mort in grave peril? He sets him back on the path to regaining his power. What does Mort do for Harry? He helps him on the path to regaining his happiness.
Yeah, and therefore his power, right?
Exactly.
He misfires against the ghouls in a situation where he absolutely shouldn't, and by the end of the book, he's Oz. He's doing all kinds of crazy stuff.
And it's an incredible bookend because when is the last time we see Harry use a pocket full of sunshine?
Yes, in
Stormfront.
Yeah.
But the point is that that's, the Bianca bookend is the last time we see him use the pocket full of sunshine. And the only time he's able to do it since then is after he makes it through this crucible.
Yeah. So when you said that Fitz and Mort are probably talking to her, reminding her, convincing her that she is not Murphy and that's the best way to help him disengage and stop holding on to her, is to make sure she doesn't tolerate him referring to the shade as the person and keep forcing him to say her, not you, when talking to Murphy's shade. That, I think, was a very important part. And the idea that Fitz and Mort did that to help her see that and help her help Dresden that way, I'm totally on board. That's in my head whole time.
So speaking of practitioners who help Harry out or who have had more power than him, Ebenezar did not have a huge part in the story, but I was really glad that Jim made sure to give him an appearance, because we absolutely could not, after peace talks leave off any mention of Ebenezer for another book. The first thing we should probably address is just Harry and Ebenezer's relationship, which they have Thanksgiving dinner together, right? I mean, it seems pretty fixed. Do you think that it actually is back to a pre-peace talk state, Adam? Or do you think that there's something simmering under the surface that's not going to come up until Thomas is back, as he now is?
It feels to me like he had a moment of important decision. At least this is going by his words. I'm assuming he's being sincere
by
to Dresden.
Words, yeah.
By Ebenezer's words, yes. I'm assuming that he is being sincere and that he did finally decide to let Dresden make his own choices, specifically about how Maggie is to be, brought up and where, and whether she'd be exposed to Thomas or whatever. Basically, Harry said, she's my girl. I make the calls, not you. And he says that is as it should be. I'm just accustomed to meddling, right? He makes it as his excuses, but says that I won't do it anymore. I think that's real. I think that's sincere. I think he still shows up to try to counsel Harry against it, but I don't think he will be imposing his will the way he did at the end of peace talks when they have the big knockdown drag out and he's like, well, I'll force you to do it my way.
Right. You don't think he's going to try to stop the wedding in a physical sense?
No, we're going to talk about that. That was my prediction. And well, we didn't actually see the wedding yet, but it was very wrong. He did everything in this book went in a more idealistic way, which was very satisfying to me, having read 17 books of Dresden getting his ass kicked both spiritually and physically by Jim, to have one book where like everything goes his way more or less. And so I didn't mind Ebenezer and him patching up the relationship that way. It felt earned, if only because Dresden deserves a little happiness now.
So the other thing that you brought up when we were talking about Ebenezer was that he mentions corner hounds in this book as the reason he had that failsafe on his staff in peace talks, implying that they've been menacing him pretty severely in the run-up to peace talks. Why did you think that was so interesting?
Yeah, he says, even me, I have contingency defenses I never thought you'd push me hard enough to activate. I've been dealing with corner hounds for several years now. They like to come when I'm asleep. I need reflex-level spells to even the field, unquote. Okay, that's crazy. They come at him when he's asleep on the farm where he has all of his wards and defenses and everything. That's crazy. He has to they've made it past all the wards and defenses while I'm asleep, and I have to have a reflex spell ready to blast them when I wake up and they're in my face. Wow. Okay, that's very scary. But the other thing that people have been speculating about is that Harry refers to them as the Hounds of Tyndalos in peace talks. Anybody who knows their Lovecraft knows that the Hounds are specifically stated to be going after time travelers. And Brian, what is it the Black Staff allows one to do?
Break the laws, of course.
Including the one against time travel. So it's entirely possible that at some point Ebenezer did break the law of time travel, and that's why the Hounds are coming after him. On the other hand, he's also one of the biggest hitters in the entire White Council, clearly on the side that's against the outside, and so it would kind of make sense for the outsiders to try and whack him.
And we can think of, a couple places where it would have made sense for Ebenezer to bend time. One is changes, obviously. The Grey Council shows up to Chichen Itza just in the nick of time. Oh, right. Yeah, sure. Another possibility is that in one of the earlier books, like Proven Guilty, perhaps, part of the shenanigans that are unexplained is Ebenezer messing with time to help out Harry. So it's possible that either of those things led to corner hounds being, sort of on his case for years.
Yeah. And I think that's also true. It was kind of a revelation when he said that the corner hounds have been harassing him for years now, because it felt to me like in peace talks that Harry and he only barely overcame the whole pack. Maybe the whole pack has not all been sent against him in the past. I don't know what it takes to get them through into the mortal world in the first place. Presumably the outsiders had help, right? You can't open the gates to the outside without somebody on this side letting something in. Was that Cowell? Was it Lord Wraith? Will we ever know? Who knows? Who's to say? But somebody opened the way for those corner hounds to get into the world in peace talks, and somebody's doing it for years now to help them go after Ebenezar. And I really want to know who it is.
Yeah, or maybe when somebody does time travel, the Hounds of Svartalves are able to use that to get into our reality. That's why they go after time travelers.
That's why time travel is forbidden.
Yeah.
Could be.
And it's possible that the reason why Ebenezar has been able to survive them in the past is that when you've got a ton of wards on your farm in the Ozarks, yeah, the whole pack can't come after you.
Yeah.
But every once in a while, when you haven't done the enchantments and, strengthened them enough.
Or you've built stuff that kills 12 of them and the last one gets through. Yeah.
Exactly.
So moving on to another relationship that's been patched up is Harry and Carlos seem pretty buddy-buddy in this one, which did seem to surprise a bunch of people. Did that surprise you, Brian?
Not really at all. I was a little bit confused as to why that was so surprising. Now, look, let's lay out the reasons why their relationship was strained. First, we have Cold Case, the situation with Molly. Carlos doesn't know, maybe suspects what Harry knows about that as Winter Night. Also, Harry in peace talks is a whole big curmudgeon about cooperating properly with the warden security team that Carlos is running. Does Carlos know that Harry puts the spell on him to distract everyone in peace talks? Maybe. And then, of course, Harry gets kicked out of the council ultimately, and Carlos has to put him on notice that he is essentially considered a warlock. All right. Basically, all of that boils down to Harry is the Winter Knight, and that's a problem for Carlos. He works for MAP. That's a problem for Carlos. So as soon as Carlos is assured of the fact that Harry is not fully under Mab's thrall, that he's still making decisions as Harry Dresden with the same motivations that he's always had, I mean, what reason does he have to not trust Harry again?
Yeah, and I think there's also, and this is a reasonable assumption and a reasonable take on peace talks and battlegrounds, is that Carlos is like giving Harry one last chance to like extend his trust, or else Carlos is going to stop trusting Harry and will believe that he went over to the monsters. Another way to interpret that is Carlos hasn't lost trust in Harry. This isn't an ultimatum about Carlos's belief. No matter what Harry does in peace talks, trust him or not, Carlos is not losing that trust as long as Harry's actions still prove that he is the person Carlos thinks he is, exactly like what you were saying. The reason Carlos is giving him these sort of ultimatums in that period is he doesn't want other wizards to lose trust in Harry. He's saying, and he said this multiple times, like, Harry, just tell us we're your friends. We want to help. And we need to be able to trust you. And when he's saying we, he means these other jokers that aren't me need to be able to trust you. I do trust you until you prove otherwise. At the end of Battleground, when Carlos comes to give Harry the message that he's been kicked out of the White Council, Harry narrates that Carlos's voice sounded ragged, like he'd been yelling or screaming, I think is the word that has been used. And boy, what else would he be screaming about if he wasn't defending Harry to the other wizards right before they made the final vote and he had to go? I mean, he says that the senior council gave the order to execute him and then had it suspended. Maybe Carlos was convincing them to suspend it and put the doom on him in lieu of giving the execution order, right? Maybe he did win that battle, and that's why he was screaming.
And that's certainly possible. Or it could be as simple as, no, Carlos was exactly communicating if you don't come clean with me now, I'm never going to trust you again. And then what happened? A lot of stuff that's way bigger than any of Carlos's personal feelings about whether Harry's being a good friend, right? SNEW declares war on basically the entire supernatural community, and Carlos fights side by side with Dresden to stop that incursion.
Right. The majority of the things you'll remember where Carlos is like not trusting Harry, it all takes place before SNEW shows up.
Right. And what also happens in Battleground, Carlos sees the rest of his friends killed in front of him viciously. And Harry survives that encounter with him.
And saves his life.
And promises that they're going to get the people who did this. And you know what? Maybe Carlos doesn't trust Harry the way he used to. Maybe Carlos wouldn't, just on Harry's say-so, do something that countermanded the authority of Lucio or somebody else on the council. Maybe he no longer feels like he can be Harry's partner in crime. But does he think that Harry is fundamentally fighting against the same things that Carlos believes wizards should fight against? Yeah, he's got to. He literally just saw the guy do that. I mean, if actions speak louder than words, he's seen all the actions.
Yeah, and we've speculated in the past that Michael might have decided that the difference between Harry, evil overlord, and Harry, Winter Knight, taking out SNEW, fighting the good fight, is Michael's friendship, and so he extended that friendship. That could be a calculus that Carlos had to deal with after SNEW is, holy crap, this guy now took out a Titan and has it under his control. So he better be trustworthy, and I better reinforce that trust as best I can, because if I'm wrong, we're screwed anyway, and it doesn't matter how much I don't trust him at that point.
And what else have we never seen? The interactions that Carlos has with other wizards that know Harry. Maybe Carlos didn't trust him. And then at one point, McCoy is saying to Carlos, listen, Ramirez, Dresden might be an asshole, and he might not confide in people, and he might this and he might that, but you better believe it, that if I thought he'd gone over to, be Mab's thug, I'd kill him yesterday.
Yeah. And I think Lucio could have that conversation too.
Exactly.
I think she knows him well enough, and she gets enough reports that she has determined that he's not that different. We haven't seen her in a long time, but I think she might play that part. Okay, so we got to move on. There's more to talk about with Carlos. Like, what's next between them? They're patched up. I can't wait to see them go kick some Drakul ass. Anyway, the Svartalves. Let's talk about the Svartalves. I saw someone on Reddit bring this up and summarize it really well, so I'm just going to use what they wrote. Morgoth the Dark Elder points out a small contradiction that is brought up here. Etri says, when talking to Harry, that if Thomas had been under Nemesis's influence, he basically says, I know the being of which you speak. If it had been inside and controlling Thomas, we would know. It would have set off our defenses. That is at odds with what we've learned before, is that even Mab and the Gatekeeper cannot tell for certain if Nemesis is inside a being. So how do we square that circle? It seems like there's only a couple options. Morgoth the Dark Elder said, okay, here's the possibilities. They do have a way of for sure detecting Nemesis, but they don't share it. B, they have a way, and they do share it, but it has some kind of prerequisite that makes it unusable outside of their home or something to that effect. C, they're lying about a surefire way. I don't think C is likely when it comes to the Svartalves. And D, they think they have a way but are mistaken. And I think you brought up E, they do have a way and they do share it. Maybe they helped build the outer gates. I like the idea that they have some way, but it's limited to maybe a specific place or something, which makes it much less valuable to try to detect Nemesis. Oh, you're going to get every potential Nemesis brought to Etri's place. I don't think he's going to go for that. So it's not really usable at that point.
Well, I think that that sort of makes sense because, maybe that they have a way that is linked to their specific threshold. And it's about what happens when a being acting against its nature crosses that threshold. It doesn't leave part of itself behind, or it does leave part of itself behind, or something like that. They use how a threshold works in order to test whether something is infected. And maybe it's not 100% certain. And that's why the gatekeeper can say, well, there's no way of knowing for sure. But I think you brought up, Adam, well, that might only be true when Nemesis is trying to sort of pass through unnoticed. Maybe when Nemesis has taken over and hijacked somebody and is, having them do things that directly further the aims of He Who Walks Beside, that is detectable by certain instruments. And the Svartalves, if Thomas was possessed when he was trying to assassinate us, we would know, because that we can detect.
Yeah, I think that's also a very strong, a possibility of what he meant, right? If Thomas was acting against his nature because he was being possessed by this thing, it would need greater control over him. And at that point, it's detectable. But if it's hiding in someone and subtly influencing or just listening and gathering intel, then it's undetectable in that circumstance. And then, of course, Harry corrects him in that conversation. It's no, Thomas wasn't infected, but someone he loves was, and they were manipulating him by threatening to kill his wife and unborn child. And then the rest of the conversation obviously happens. Now, as far as the resolution with the Svartalves, how did you like that? I've seen mixed responses to that sort of answer of Thomas's child is going to them. Was that possible the whole time? And Harry just needed to say that to Ettri, as an option? Could Ettri have suggested that? Or was there something that changed from the conversation with Ettri to the point where that is what happens?
I mean, Mab definitely put her thumb on the scale. That's part of what that boon was for. She is the head of the Unseelie Accords. She can tell Ettri, no, under the laws, this would balance the scales. And Ettri can, believe that and take that to the bank and take it to his people and say, Queen Mab has decreed, et cetera, without looking weak or making his nation seem weak. They are just being good signatories to the Accords. So I think that it did take Mab's participation to sort of give everyone a fig leaf that allowed them to retreat from that situation and to sort of say that would balance the scales. But also it makes perfect sense from a Fae point of view. We've seen the Fae take children in this story. We know that's a thing that they do. The Svartalves maybe don't, as a rule, so they needed it suggested to them. It's not normally what they would think of as a balancing mechanism, but it literally is a life for a life. They get a immortal, powerful creature on their side, presumably, in exchange for losing Austri, who is, in terms of, being a bodyguard, the same thing. The child is sort of weregild in that it is as valuable as that man-at-arms. So I think it does work for balancing the scales, and it also works as a punishment for Thomas, which is, I think, something that was also necessary for the Svartalves, but they couldn't know that it would be a sufficient punishment without Mab's assurances.
Yeah, and the other thing that I put together here, and this is just, I don't know there's a lot of evidence for this explanation, but my take is that during the conversation with Ettri earlier in the book, if Harry had suggested, what if Thomas gives up his unborn child? I think the answer would have been no. Because Ettri basically says, if you can prove that Nemesis was directly involved in this, then I can convince my people to not seek the death penalty for Thomas. That appeared to be the only way that they would do that. Now, what I think happened is similar in that Mab intervened. But I think what Mab did is she went to Ettri and said, Nemesis was involved. Look, I have Justine, his girl, and you can use your tests if you want. Nemesis is there.
I literally cannot lie.
And also, I literally cannot lie. Exactly right. And so behind the scenes, Etri was provided with the evidence he required, which took Thomas off of the death is required list. And so they were able to then seek other ways of solving this more diplomatically. And you still, though, can't just go to everybody in your court and say, it's okay, guys. Mab assured me that this super secret enemy that none of you know about was responsible, right? He needs something else that he can feed them. And that's where the child idea comes into play. It can pacify everybody and hide the fact that this is really Mab and Etri going, we know Nemesis is really the threat here, and it wasn't Thomas. So they can come to an accord, and he has cover for his people by taking the child for all the reasons that you just said. You know, a life for a life, that's their code, and now they have a replacement bodyguard, and it's a punishment for Thomas. Like, all of those things provide the cover, but the real answer is that it wouldn't have been possible without Mab saying Nemesis did it.
And I think that that resolution is over in the sense that the actual issue of why Thomas had to hide away is solved. We see him walking around as a free man at the end of the book. Mm-hmm. But I don't think this is the last we're going to hear of this situation. Obviously, Justine does not appear to be back in town yet. And at some point, this child is no longer going to be an infant and is going to need to be taught by Thomas about its White Court heritage. And all of these things probably are going to come up at some point.
There might be a situation where Thomas has to greet his son as a ward of the Svartalves. He's going there for some diplomatic thing with Harry, and he has to hide the fact that he knows the kid is his son and he can't say anything. That would be gut-wrenching. That sounds like the kind of thing Jim would do, but I don't think we'll see any on-purpose interactions with that kid anymore.
Yeah, that's certainly possible. It depends, I think, to a large extent as to whether we see the Svartalves again.
Right.
And I'm interested in seeing how Jim does navigate it, because it's a huge potential emotional minefield for Thomas, but it's also, you know, he sort of set up this fact about Justine now. You can never tell her. This would shatter her mentally.
Yes.
You know, I'm not hoping that we see that proven correct, but it's a little bit of a Chekhov's gun.
That's true. That's unfortunate. But yeah, I mean, how are you gonna explain a year missing from her memory? Oh, yeah, you were captured by an evil sorcerer and he stole your memory. What happened during that year? Oh, you know, NEW attacked, and also there were these peace talks.
And it's presumably not just a year, right? Because Nemesis has been influencing her probably since Cold Days?
Yeah, but I wonder if it's been subtle enough that she doesn't necessarily know until Battleground, or Peace Talks rather, when it has to go, you know, obvious mode.
Well, certainly at least the beginning of her pregnancy was also taken from. I guess that's about a year fully.
Yes, I think that's, and so she can't know that she has a kid. Like, that's also heart-wrenching in a sense, but
it is the entire year.
Right.
Which is, yeah.
All right, we got to move on. Let's talk about the castle and all of its accoutrements, including Spice Goyles, Knights of the Bean, and Bob, and all of its power and everything like that. Now, the first thing I want to point out is that Harry specifically appears to believe that Marcone had already taken up Namshiel's coin as early as Ghost Story, because he says, quote, he had a fallen angel whose province is magic advising him when he did, unquote. That is, when he brought the castle over. So sometime between Changes and Ghost Story is definitely Marconchiel, however you want to say that, is what Harry thinks. And I think what Daniel said in the chat during our pre-show is that Harry getting shot in Changes and presumed dead is the trigger that causes Marcone to say, well, I better dig that coin out and use it now.
And I think that's certainly possible. I think it could have happened before then as well. Marcone is not somebody who sits on potential power-ups for very long. He's the kind of person who makes deals that he thinks are in his favor. So he might have taken up the coin shortly after Small Favor. We can't know one way or another. But I think it's pretty obvious that when Marcone had the castle brought over, he must have been working with NEWCHAPTER. Because even if he asked Guard what castle to bring, and even if Odin knew that this, you want to build a magically defensible stronghold, Marcone? Okay, I'll ask my boss, Odin, what you should do. And then Odin said, okay, you should take this castle. And Odin's not sitting there and supervising the reconstruction.
No.
And Guard probably doesn't have the capability to.
No, her magic is rune-based, right? Every time we've seen her do magic, it has something to do with sort of runic, either tiles or something that's carved into her axe that she activates. It seems like Valkyrie magic, it works differently than the way that wizard magic does.
Absolutely. So, even if he didn't get the idea to move the castle over from Namshiel, you have to expect that he must have taken up the coin, if only to help rebuild it.
Mm-hmm.
And that if he hadn't done that, it would be obviously wrong in certain ways, because no one would have had the expertise to do anything but guess how all the pieces fit together.
Yeah. So that's what it comes down to. I think Harry's right. You think Harry's right. Definitely buy Ghost Story. He's got Thorn of Namshiel in him, which is a pretty interesting piece of information. We don't know how much earlier it was. The earliest it could be is Small Favor, right? So sometime between Small Favor and the End of Changes. All right. Moving on, though, I do want to bring up one little thing that I've seen people talk about. And they're like, oh, well, in The Good People, which is the story that it's a microfiction about Molly basically racing Santa Claus on Christmas Day. In The Good People, she remarks about how the gargoyles are chasing off the Winter Fae that are delivering presents, and then Harry doesn't officially get those gargoyles until February. But I would only point out that he notices something flying above him several times before February. And that suggests that they were already there protecting. So I don't think that's a discrepancy the way that people are pointing it out. I think that makes perfect sense to me. They are protecting him and his castle on Christmas Day, even without him knowing it.
I think we also, as a community, sort of need to differentiate between the microfictions that Jim is setting out to give us a lore information and the ones that are kind of nice bits of characterization. Like, if something in Vignette was contradicted by something in a book somewhere, I think we can just follow the book continuity. Vignette is not important in terms of its lore information.
Right. But Goodbye seems very purposeful, right? That's the one where Vignette, by the way, if you're not familiar, Vignette is the one which is basically Harry and Bob arguing over what to put in his classified ad, which is, it's only a couple paragraphs long. And Goodbye is the one where basically Ivy fires Kincaid after like learning that he is going to try to murder Dresden. And Ivy convinces him to shoot Dresden in the chest, not the head. That seems very purposeful by Jim. Whereas you're right, that little one-off thing about, oh, his gargoyles are there, doesn't seem as super important.
Right. I think we can take the Morgan microfiction journal to the bank.
Yes.
Everything in that Jim gave us as, this is a lore thing I want you guys to have so that you can understand.
Yes.
But the, racing Santa story is about characterizing Molly and helping us understand the Winter Court and how those relationships feel. It's not supposed to be giving us specific names and dates and weights and measures.
Yeah.
So I don't think we should take that very seriously as a discrepancy. It's just not that meaningful, guys.
Yeah. So moving on, Harry now has a serious threshold that he's never had before with major wards to back it up.
Adam, does the threshold require that those people are living in the castle, or does the castle just come with a threshold?
I mean, the way that it was written, it suggests that the threshold is stronger because they are living there. You have multiple family units that are, living and pulling themselves to a difficult time. And from what we've sort of learned is that a happy, healthy family unit creates the strongest threshold, especially if it's happy, healthy family units through multiple generations like Murphy's house was. And we also know that like a lone bachelor and his dog doesn't have a very strong threshold. Now Harry has his dog, his cat, his Bob, his gargoyles, his Maggie, most importantly, because now we're talking about family again directly, and all these other families living in that place as well. I think all of those things combined make this a stronger threshold than normal. I don't know that the castle comes with its own threshold. I think the wards are much, much stronger, and they're building off of a stronger threshold as well.
And I think that that's really interesting because we know from Grave Peril that Mort using his home as a business has effectively eroded its threshold.
Which meant that Marcone using it as the Brighter Future Society probably also meant it didn't have a very good threshold. But we know Bob had trouble getting in there, so.
Right. So there seems to be something odd about the castle and how it sort of pulls the threshold energy into its defenses. Or it might just be that, like Demon Reach, it doesn't need a threshold for certain things.
Yeah.
It can just be a barrier to the Negloshi because that's how the spells and the thing are configured. But it does seem like this is giving us a really good reason for Harry to continue having other families living under his roof. It strengthens his threshold. And that's not something that Harry's going to consciously decide, but it seems to be giving us sort of a narrative way that the castle needs to remain this bastion, not just for Dresden, but for others. Which makes me wonder when the other shoe is going to drop in terms of getting the money to keep running it.
Yeah, that was definitely a thing where it's like, oh no, it's going to run out in next spring or summer, and we're about to hit next spring or summer, so we're going to have to figure out what happens in the next book. Now, there's a couple other things about the castle I just want to breeze over because we've got a lot of other things we want to talk about. Obviously, now he has the Spice Goyles as a security system. That makes me wonder, what else can these Earth spirits do? Are they just physical guardians that are able to, do they have any other spells other than melding into the ground? I don't know. Well, that'll be an interesting thing to find out in the future. How many Knights of the Bean are working in there? What's Harry going to do with them? His castle can bend ley lines in order to siphon power for Harry to channel. That is a huge power up for him. I really want to talk about what could possibly be happening with that. But we have a lot of other more pressing things that happen in this book that I want to get to. So we'll definitely want to talk about his castle at some point in the future. But for now, let's move on to a much bigger topic, Brian. Drakul shows up for the second time in this series, in this book. And boy, is he just as scary and ridiculously confident as he was in the previous one.
Oh my God. Just this guy he's nothing we've ever seen anywhere else in the series.
I would argue that Pharaohvax is about similar.
Well, isn't that interesting? So we'll get into that in a second, but let's just lay this out for Drakul in this book. You guys know the arc of the story. You know, Drakul simultaneously seems to be a major antagonist because he kills all of Dresden's friends in battlegrounds, but he also is helping Dresden out. He keeps Dresden from getting caught by surprise in the attack at the end of the book. So, you know, what's his deal? Whose side is he on anyway? Okay, so in order to investigate that, we have to ask a lot of questions about who is Drakul really? And what are his motivations? There is a historical Drakul. Dracula is a historical figure. Vlad Tepes III, I think, is Vlad Dracula. He is a voivode of Wallachia when that area is being contested by the Ottoman Empire and the Christian kingdoms of Europe. And Drakul is Dracula's father, and he is awarded a membership in, I think, the Order of the Dragon, which is where the name comes from. Drakul is a Romanian, a Latin-based language, a Romance language. It's a Romanian word that means either dragon or devil. Okay, so one possibility is that Drakul is, just like the historical counterpart, several hundred years old and was a starborn or something, and, essentially lived that person's life and has just had this afterlife. That really doesn't seem to be the case.
Right.
Drakul seems to be a much older and much more powerful figure.
Yeah, Mab says, I would not go to war with him. Mab.
Right. So, all right, then why has he got the name Drakul? I mean, that name means either dragon or devil. So, when you say the only person who seems to act like this is Farovax, well, that's interesting because we know there's one other dragon around who we haven't met.
Yeah, unnamed, I believe.
The other possibility is that this is the freaking Prince of Darkness, man!
Dun, dun, dun!
Which would work because he does seem to have a lot of darkness-themed powers. He throws Chandler bodily into effectively an oubliette of blackness. This is very light and dark theme. Lucifer might mean Lightbringer, but usually as a fallen angel, the devil is, considered to be something of the dark. He's very charming and handsome and, sort of all of those things that are associated with the devil. And we know from Jim that Drakul is something inhuman in human form, so could be a dragon or a devil or something. And Kincaid, who used to work for him, has the nickname the Hellhound.
Yeah.
So some sort of association with hell could certainly be the reason Drakul is exactly what he is.
Yeah. Now, I would push back a little bit about the Lucifer connection. I like that sounds really interesting, but if it were true, I would have expected way more connections with the Denarians in that case.
Absolutely.
And we haven't, nowhere in any of the Denarian books is Drakul even mentioned. So it seems very unlikely. It would feel very odd for that to be a connection that's here. The other thing is, the Black Court is connected to him somehow, not the Denarians. That's a little odd. So the idea that he is a dragon, maybe trapped in his human form, is a really interesting one, because I think Jim has basically said that he's some kind of an immortal being trapped in a mortal body, maybe something from the Never Never, like a dragon, maybe. And so I that's kind of where I'd be closest to guessing. I believe the other one that resonated with me is somebody suspecting that he's the last survivor of a universe that the outsiders did destroy. And he came to this universe as he was a starborn from that universe, and that's why he's a starborn in this universe. That is another one that I thought sounded really cool. Again, pure speculation, not really anything there to support it, but I like both of those, the dragon one and that one, more than the Lucifer one.
And I think that we have to just keep in mind the idea that Drakul could be just an ancient human, in the sense of he was maybe the first starborn in this universe. And he has been essentially holding down that mantle since he's the eldest starborn, effectively. And he's been holding down that mantle since literally time immemorial. And he is not something inhuman in human form in the sense of he started out as something that wasn't a human. But Drakul, as a starborn, has become something that is fundamentally not human anymore. And he only retains that human form as a consequence of having been born one.
Yeah, that's also possible. And the other one that I considered is maybe he's just a guy that completed an ascension ritual. Some kind of ascension
did the Dark Hallow, right?
Doesn't have to be the Dark Hallow. It's some kind of ascension ritual, right? We've also seen the example in Welcome to the Jungle where the hag was trying to complete an entirely different ascension ritual. Something that pulls a huge amount of power in you and makes you immortal, more or less. So that's also a possibility in my head, is that he is somebody that just God Ascension ritual happen. We know that happened several times in the olden days. That's how a lot of like the Greek and Roman and Norse gods came to be, is various ascension rituals. I think that is explicitly mentioned in Welcome to the Jungle, where this hag is trying to recreate an ascension ritual that her former goddess had done, and she's trying to like take her place or something. So one thing I want to take it back to the book here, Brian, is Drakul being sincere through this whole book when he shows up at the party and says, "Oh, hey, Dresden, I hope that you understand killing your friends, it wasn't personal. It was just business. And I hope you're, a big enough person to see that and we can still, get along fine." And of course, that's not the case. But then later when he says, "I sincerely hope you enjoy your evening," giving them a warning. I mean, all of this stuff, is he being sincere throughout this book? What's your take?
Okay, not to be pedantic, even though that's basically what the show is about.
Yeah.
What do you mean by sincere?
I mean, when he speaks, is he doing manipulation insofar as, he doesn't mean what he says, but he's trying to convince somebody else that he does mean? Is he using any kind of deception?
See, the reason why I ask, what do you mean by sincere, is because I think, like with fairies, two things can be true simultaneously.
Okay.
Where Drakul does mean everything he says, but he also means other things that aren't necessarily obvious when you look at what he says. So when he gives, Dresden his card saying, "If anybody wants to take a shot at me, here's my address. I'll be waiting."
Yeah. And by that, by the way, he's inviting the entire he's not saying you and your friend Ramirez. He's saying anybody from your team that wants to try.
If the entire senior council wants to try to cast a ritual spell to take me out, here's my fucking address.
Exactly.
Give it your best
That's
shot.
why the balls on this guy, right? So that, I think what that suggests is that he doesn't need deceit and deception. He can be 100% honest and still get his way because like everything else that's happening is like so small and he like doesn't care about it. It seems like the only thing he does care about is whatever this cycle is bringing. That's the only thing that he cares about.
This is where I think that the question becomes a little complicated, because I think that everything he says is true in the sense that he's not lying. Drakul is having, and this stuff doesn't really matter to him. And he's sort of seen it all before. And fundamentally, he considers 1897 like it was yesterday, and the slaughter of the Black Court to be kind of a fun prank that someone pulled on him once.
Yeah.
Like that
crazy.
really is how he thinks about it, because he's just got this much larger perspective. But there is a big question in this series that Drakul's existence almost certainly orbits around as a starboard. Where do you stand in relation to the outsiders?
Yes.
And the answers are either you're trying to stop them, or you're trying to help them, or take the third option, you're trying to manipulate the chaos of the outsiders being around to get what you want. Drakul could be literally any of those. But I think that whatever he's doing has some degree of manipulation with regards to what his larger plan is in relation to that. And part of the reason why Mab might not be able or willing to go to war with him, and why the senior council won't take him out even if they have his address, is that he's not on team outside. Which would make sense as a starborn. He's not actually trying to destroy reality.
I can agree with that.
And maybe Mab and the senior council kind of all think they need him.
Yeah.
And that would be scary as hell. But if he was working with the outsiders to destroy reality, presumably Mab wouldn't have the luxury of that opinion.
Right. Exactly. That's true. That's true. If he was working with Team Outside, she would be working against him. Full stop. She wouldn't let him sign her accords, right? Part of that seems counterproductive, I think. So, yeah, it's really hard to guess what his goals are, but they seem to revolve around the cycle. And that's why I kind of like your idea that, like, there is some kind of competition or something that narrows it down to one Starborn at the end that gets all the power to help defeat the Outsiders. And he's been like the undefeated champion for the last 17 cycles or whatever, however long it needs to be. That is a good possibility. And that's why it's, oh, well, the field is good this year, kind of like treating everything as a game, essentially.
Well, and it's possible that it's not just a competition between Starborn. It might be the case that the Starborn, as a whole, have to prevent the Outsiders from getting in every cycle.
Mm-hmm.
But then, after they do that, whatever person is the Starborn who's left is able to change something or control something or do something with regards to reality. So Drakul doesn't want to take out somebody like Harry because in the beginning of this whole situation, Harry's going to be on his team, sort of regardless of what Harry wants.
Mm-hmm.
But then at the end of this situation, he might have to take Harry out. So his measuring of the field could be a double-edged sword where he's trying to ascertain the strength of his eventual allies while at the same time figuring out how he's going to eventually backstab them.
Yep. And why this castle attack was like, well, if he's not strong enough to survive this, then I don't think I want him fighting alongside me. And if he is, then he gets rid of, some of my lackeys that are less than competent.
And it might make sense as to why Drakul is so cavalier about the Black Court's destruction if fundamentally he's on team pro-universe, because it seems like all of the vampire courts have something to do with Outsiders.
Mm-hmm.
It's very possible that the reason why we're told that Dracula was a disappointment is because his dad's a Starborn and he ended up dabbling beyond the outer gates. And the Black Court are effectively, from Dracul's perspective, a bunch of demons on a leash where he can sort of keep his eye on them, but fundamentally they're almost more trouble than they're worth because they're inherently aligned with the outside in some way. So sacrificing a bunch of their elders is sort of working with whatever he's trying to achieve ultimately. And he needs to keep so fairly fresh ones around because he can sort of control them and use them to get make progress towards his ends, which don't involve the Outsiders taking over. Obviously, this is all wild speculation.
Yeah.
But the point is that in the wake of this book, we've gotten completely rocked by a 1-2 from Drakul, where on the one side, he seemed to be working with NEWCHAPTER, killing wardens left and right, and about to do a big necromantic ritual. But on the other hand, he seems to not want to try to kill the Starborn Winter Knight Warden of Demon Reach.
Yeah.
And those things seem incompatible unless Drakul has some much, much larger game with regards to the ultimate confrontation of the series.
Yeah, I can't disagree. It's hard to square that circle, but that sounds like the best way to do it.
So give us your fan theories. Theories.
Yes, mac@rnt.fm. All right, let's move on to the castle attack. Now, there's a fundamental question here that came up when I was reading is, okay, how is Lord Wraith slipping out from Lara's control? Because he's been under her control for 10-ish years now, since Blood Rights. It's been at least 10 years, I think.
I mean, do we want to get into this? Do we really want to get into this, Adam?
Yes.
Okay, I mean, how does he get put under Lara's control?
But she uses her power to subdue his will.
Okay, that's a really, boulderized way of saying what she does, right? Like, how does Lara get her father
She kind of
under
addicts
her control?
/ enslaves him using her power.
And her power is sex.
Yes.
Let's be really clear here.
Yes.
Lara is a succubus, and she succubizes him to be under her control. Okay.
Right.
And listen, I'm going to say something that's a little gross. Turnabout is fair play. He is a really bad guy who is apparently doing the exact same thing to his own family in a way that is truly horrifying and gross, and is like one of the... Jim doesn't really talk about this very much because it's awful, but that's what Lord Wraith was doing. Lara seems to have become a way nicer person in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
So she's probably not quite so keen to keep reinforcing her control in that manner. So that's why he's slipping out of her control. She thinks that she's put him in his place, and now he knows what the pecking order is, and she doesn't have to keep victimizing him in this way. And he, when he sees, her no longer doing that, says, aha, she is weak, and I can capitalize on this.
Yeah, and he's maybe managed to play the part very effectively to where he's lulling her into a false sense of security. Now, all of this makes Lara look a little bit stupid because she's supposed to be this incredibly cunning character that is really good at underhanded stuff, and that's why she's the queen of the underhanded vampires, right? So that makes it a difficult pill to swallow because it really undermines her character a lot.
I don't really think it does. I mean, it's not stupid for Lara to say at some point, look, this is the way things are, and I'm going to give you the chance to go along with this, and I'm going to stop doing this to you. And that would be that's like the kind of thing that Harry would do. Right? So if Lara is being influenced by people like Harry and Thomas to behave in a more humane way, it's not this, being idealistic and being stupid are different things. If you're being idealistic, you might fully understand the risks that you're taking, but you think that they are worth it because of what you were trying to achieve. So I don't think it makes sense to say that Lara is being stupid with regards to her father. She might just not want to take some steps that, she thinks are bad. Because the other option, right, is to kill him. And the big issue with that is, technically, if she does that, she doesn't just become the undisputed ruler of the White Court. She was never elected.
Right.
So as soon as she pulls that lever, there's a power vacuum and there's infighting.
Yeah, and I think the time to do that would have been during White Night or during the aftermath, because the other two families had their upper management just lopped right off.
Right.
So if you were going to kill him, do it during that period of chaos, reassert control before, the new Malvora head comes and can challenge you properly. Now, maybe there wasn't an opportunity. I mean, Jim can write it however he wants, but I got to tell you, I was surprised that Lara didn't have him killed once it became an open secret that he was her puppet. Because my understanding was that bought her a lot of credibility, is that she was able to puppet him for so long and keep it a secret. And then once people finally started to figure it out, at that point, he's no longer valuable and you just kill him, right? I think, though, and we were speculating about this on the Patreon episode, that she has slowly become a less ruthless, more compassionate person. Even before this book, she spent some 10 years finally trying to figure out who she was when she wasn't under her father's thumb. And I think she couldn't pull the trigger on it, not even to hire somebody else to do it with a cat's paw the way you're supposed to or whatever. I think she had some misgivings about it being moral or ethical to do so, and so just kept the status quo, and maybe, like you were talking about, got a little lax as a result.
And I think there's also an extent to which it was a big coup for her to be able to control the court through him. That added to her credibility and secured her position. But if she then killed him, what's that signaling? Something went wrong.
Yeah. True enough.
So it might be the case that it was sort of always going to be a bit of a delicate balance after it became an open secret, that if she took direct action to remove him, that would be seen as very inartful and a sign of weakness.
Mm-hmm. And if she gets a cat's paw to do it outside the family, that is a huge diplomatic problem because now she has to strike back or else appear weak. So, there's definitely complications for sure. The way that she described, she spends 2 hours dealing with difficult or impossible decisions and the rest of the day dealing with the ramifications of those decisions that have come before. That sounds like the kind of thing the leader of the cunning vampires that are always looking for a sneaky approach would have to deal with. Now, there is one other option, and that's Lord Wraith has help. Somebody else is managing,
Right.
like if he is normally ordered and forced by whatever power she has over him to stay in his room unless she's there to oversee and like control what he's doing or whatever. Somebody's figured out how to sneak messages to him and coordinate stuff and figure out what he wants them to do outside of her control. And that one also, it could very well be a combination of both, the one you're talking about and the one I'm talking about. So,
well, I think that's very likely because we can almost certainly take to the bank that Lord Wraith was a member of the Black Council.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is pretty much set in stone as close as we can. We're never going to probably have a membership roster. The two names that we can be most assured are part of the group are Cal and Lord Wraith.
Yeah.
So who might be helping him? Well, Cal, because if Lord Wraith does get out from Valara's thumb, then, Cal's back in control of the White Court, which is what he was trying to do in White Knight in the first place.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Okay, moving on a little bit here. So the castle attack is there. Lord Wraith tips his cap to Dresden. But before all that even happens, Drakul warns Dresden.
And what's coming to me now might be the fact that Mavra is simultaneously a Black Council adjacent and a double agent for Drakul. So Mavra knows of this attack and was brought on to this attack because she's theoretically in league with whatever people Lord Wraith is working with and etc. But really, Mavra is Drakul's most loyal servant. She got him the word of Kemmler, and that's why they were doing that whole necromantic ritual in Battleground in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
That's her whole thing. And she told Drakul, hey, they're going to try to whack Dresden. And Drakul simply wants Dresden to survive because he thinks he's going to be able to use him.
Mm-hmm.
So he tipped him off. And it wasn't even if he dies, it was if I tip him off, he will survive and I'll tip him off.
Yeah, I think that's true too. Now, one thing I do want to mention about the castle, we talked, by the way, a lot about the castle attack in the Patreon episode. There's not a lot of lore stuff here that we didn't really already talk about, but one thing I do want to point out is that when it comes to Black Court vampires, when Jim wants them to die, by God, he crushes them to death. Of all the different things in Stoker's book, stake through the heart, garlic, chopping off their head, you know what does it most of the time? Crushed to death. The turkey in Blood Rights, the super gravity in It's My Birthday 2, the anvil in Battleground, and the castle stones here in 12 months. It's a pattern, Brian. He really wants these Black Court to get squished.
I just can't wait until he drops like Mount Rushmore on one of them in the future. Or just
the scale just keeps going up.
Right, larger and larger things to squash them with. Yes, I mean he sets one on fire in Blood Rights, but I think that Jim really prefers the bug approach to Black Court vampires.
Seems
they must
like
be
it.
squashed.
I'm doing my part. All right, now, Mab stuff and the wedding. This is a big one. We see a lot of Mab in this book, and to my untrained trained eye? Maybe it's a trained eye. To my eye, Mab acts quite differently. At the very least, like her speech patterns change wildly in this book. The character from Peace Talks / Battleground that I know only appears a couple of times. Everyone else, when Mab shows up, feels a little bit different in one way or another. Did you get that impression?
No. And that's where I'm going to ask you, what do you mean she's acting so different?
So the Mab in Peace Talks and Battlegrounds doesn't use a huge amount of formal language. The Mab here, in several cases, uses the thys and the thous, and sometimes that makes sense, like when she's meeting Dresden and he's formally requesting his boon or his reward or something, but she also, like, mounts him in his bed after he delivers Lara and the White Court, which seemed very out of character. Now, she was like super happy about the fact that he'd finally delivered what she wanted him to deliver, but it still seemed way out of character for the Mab, who is normally this like force of nature to be feared, instead like just straddling him and like being this weird like sexual aggression predator in that moment. That's just not something I normally associate with that character that we've seen before. Obviously, when he became the Winter Knight, that was a thing, but since then, haven't really seen her sexualizing him in any way necessarily. So those are the kinds of things I'm thinking about. And then, of course, the way that she like goes kind of crazy eating the bread with his blood on it. Just several periods where the way she talked and the way she presented herself felt very different.
All right, let me pitch you this. Mab is perfectly consistent from her first appearance in Summer Night through 12 months. And the way that you reconcile all of this is by understanding exactly what Mab is. Mab is a wizard who became effectively a god, and her whole job is this very exhausting thing where, much like Lara, for 2 hours a day, she makes decisions that determine, even bigger, the survival of the universe, and the rest of the time she deals with the fallout of those decisions. And most of everything Mab does is geared towards creating the persona that creates the least possible friction for her to do that job. But that persona has nothing to do with who Mab is or what she thinks or what she feels. It's entirely about efficacy. So Mab, when you're in the position to get to know her, when you're her BFF Sarissa who goes to the movies with her, or when you're the Winter Knight who she relies on to do important tasks, you get to see the other side of her, who is fundamentally, on some level, still basically just a person who, despite the fact that she is deeply affected by the probably 1,000 years she's held her mantle, acts in ways that are very human. Mab is so ecstatic when Harry brings the White Court under her thumb that she wants to sleep with him. She wants to, like, I mean, she's just like, she's so excited. Now, you know, maybe a normal person, you know, you go out and have a nice dinner with, and you know, she's the queen of air and darkness now. You got to kind of take a different turn there. But when she uses all the these and thous and the archaic speech, well, that's often acting. That's how people think she should be. So when you're making a formal request of her, she does it. And, as we discussed in the Patreon episode, when she's doing the great theater in Demon Reach, she uses a lot of that language because she's trying to make this big, grand, slow thing so that Thomas has time to wake up and people can gradually stop her. She's sort of playing along, and when she uses that archaic speech. So if we stop treating Mab as just a force of nature, but consider that Mab is a person who has to be seen as a force of nature, I think actually she's perfectly consistent.
So the other thing that occurred to me while you were because kind of what you're saying here is that she puts on whatever mask is going to be most effective at getting what she wants, right? And for a while, that mask was the demanding, you know, overlord that we saw in Peace Talks and Battlegrounds that occasionally, you know, showed you some inner piece, like when she says, I was mortal once, I think in Cold Days, right? Or no, I'm sorry, that was in Battleground, I'm sorry. But she does sort of reveal more of her mortal nature to Dresden specifically in Cold Days. And again, sort of your argument is that's because that's the most effective way to get him to do what she wants. And maybe that's changing here, or maybe that scene where he finally delivers, like her mask is slipped. She's like, you did it finally. I don't have to do all this stupid mask stuff anymore about this. You've done it. So that's certainly possible too.
And I think we see her mask slip in a couple other places, like in Skin Game. I get the impression that there's a couple times where Mab literally can't just tell Dresden what the plan is.
Mm-hmm.
But she's just kind of sitting there rolling her eyes being like, come on, dummy. Can't you see that? Like, why would I like Nicodemus? He's such a jerk.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh my God, Harry, I can't believe you just think that like I don't care about all the stuff this guy does. He messes with my turf. Of course I don't like him. I think a lot of Mab's sort of dry sense of humor sometimes and her seeming almost tendency to roll her eyes at Dresden is because she can't just say it. But the truth is that, like, fundamentally, deep down, as we've speculated, Mab doesn't want people to get hurt more than is necessary for her to do her job.
And I think I agree with that, too. The other possibility that I brought up on the Patreon show that I'm also kind of tied to is Mab specifically says that she has been putting herself back together from the damage that she suffered in Battleground, right? I believe that's the scene where Harry uses her name properly with will behind it when he accuses her, when he asks her if she purposefully got Murphy killed. And she, says, we'll overlook this because we know that you are hurting from the damage you took to your banner as we are also recovering from the damage we took to our banner or whatever. So that to me suggests that maybe part of this is the masks are slipping because she's not all there, with the whole concept of when your spirit is torn to pieces, like we learn about in Great Peril, when Mickey's spirit is all torn up and Harry says it's like when somebody near close to you dies, it tears you up inside. Well, maybe that's similar to what happened to Mab when the people under her banner died while connected to her. Not only that, but obviously the direct shot from the Eye of Balor that she had to stop, like all kinds of things could have damaged her during that. And the result could be she's a little bit less stable than normal, and so she's not as cool, calm, and collected as we've seen in the last several books. So that's kind of more my leaning is.
Yeah, I think that all these things can work in concert, right? Mab is a little bit more human underneath it all than we've been led to believe. And because she's literally hurting as a human would, we get to see that a little bit more than we would otherwise. So I think all that works in concert. Mab being more of a person means that Mab, when she's hurt, is more vulnerable, which is also why she has to, at some points in the book, be very harsh because she knows she's vulnerable.
Yeah, that makes sense to me too. Now, let's see. The next thing, it's just sort of something I want to clear up because I've seen other people. I had this question too, and I sort of answered it for myself to my own satisfaction. But Mab talks about Nemesis and says, Nemesis, you are 13 down to 12, and now I will bring you down to 11, meaning when she extracts the Nemesis from Justine and puts it back into Medea's bodkin, which I think we determined is another name for the knife.
Morgana's Athame.
Yeah, Morgana's Athame. Now, that, of course, leads to the question, okay, so if Leah was the 13 to 12, and this is 12 to 11, what about Maeve? And what about Catsith? And what about Aurora? And I don't know, this seems like there's only one real answer to that question.
So I can think of a couple different configurations, but the easiest one is just that Aurora and Catsith's pieces weren't recovered, and that Leah's was, because she was trapped in the ice and cured, and so will Justine's be. And Maeve's was a separate piece. It's the piece that went into Justine in the first place. Is that what you were thinking?
Oh, that's possible. I kind of thought that killing a person is not enough to kill the piece inside them, right?
Yeah.
That's sort of like the simplest answer. I didn't actually think about that, but it could be Cold Days is when Justine got infected by the piece that was in Maeve, because I believe Justine was there.
She was on the island, yeah.
On that island, so it's entirely possible that there's a proximity that's necessary and it was able to jump to her. I was also thinking of like maybe the way that He Who Walks Beside works is all of these pieces are parts of a whole, like a hive mind type thing, right? Kind of makes sense. And if one host dies, well, then the piece can like return back to one of the other places that it is infected. Yeah, I think that's
definitely true.
And then that thing can infect someone else. So those are the two possibilities there. Now,
and I think we know that that's the case because that is how we explain what happened to Catsith, right? Maeve captures him. They got to Yasith, right? Maeve captures him and infects him with one of those pieces that has returned to her. I think the only real question is if the piece from Medea's Bodkin, Morgana's Athame, was in Leia, then what infected Maeve? And that's where I think, maybe there was more than one piece of Nemesis in the Bodkin. Maybe all the pieces were in Morgana's Athame.
Yeah.
We don't exactly know how that worked. But that's, I think, the only thing that's confusing. How was it that both Leia and Maeve were affected by different pieces if it was through the same artifact?
Yeah. So the next thing I want to jump to here when it has to do with Mab and Winter here is Mother Winter's line talking about Harry, quote, "He comes of a line of thieves." I think she's got to be referring to the Blackstaff, right? Her walking stick. I mean, that's pretty clear there. But when she says line, I wonder if she's talking about bloodline, right? Harry to Ebenezer was Ebenezer the one that stole it from her? Maybe, or maybe it was much earlier than that. And maybe Ebenezer's father, grandfather, grandmother, whatever, was actually the one that stole it. Or does this line mean a line of mentors to apprentices, right? Going back in time, because we know that Ebenezer is of that line all the way back to the original Merlin, mentor to apprentice. So maybe Merlin was the one that stole her staff and passed it down to his apprentices. That's entirely possible.
Por qué no los dos, Adam?
Of course. Okay.
I mean, we do know that wizards usually seem to train their children. That seems to be the case. We know that Ebenezer trained Maggie, and then when Maggie wasn't around to train Harry, Ebenezer ended up doing that eventually, too. So it could be that it's both. But I also think you might be onto something. This does seem to suggest that Harry descends by blood from somebody who stole the Blackstaff from Mother Winter. And I just want to throw out a couple possibilities for who that could be. One is, of course, Merlin. I think that makes a lot of sense. But Adam, do you remember who trained Merlin?
No, my Arthurian lore is very bad, and I'm trying to fix that.
Oh, no. I don't mean an Arthurian lore. I mean, as far as we know in the Dresden files, I believe it came up once that Odin is rumored to have been the person who trained Merlin. And I've always been of the opinion that Harry and Odin may be very distantly related. Odin might be the person who originally took the Blackstaff, and that's how he became the ascended hero god of the Norse Germanic tribes. And just the reason why I think this would make sense is it would provide a reason for Odin to take an interest in Harry. It would provide a reason why the Bloodline Curse was to be so big for the Red Court, because it was aimed at taking out Odin, and why he showed up to Chichen Itza to get rid of it. And it would also explain why Harry and Odin are both described constantly with the wolfish smile and as being really tall and lean, and, they sort of have these characteristics in common.
Could be.
So I don't necessarily think that's true, but I think that is definitely a possibility, and I just figured I'd flag it here if we're talking about, where the lore is leading us.
Yeah, I could definitely see that as a possibility. I still like the idea that I like the master apprentice thing. I think it might be Bloodline is like a misdirect that Jim is doing, and that would be a fun way to.
And it could just refer to wizards generally. He comes from a line,
right?
Like
it could it could refer to wizards generally, but I think it seems more specific.
Geez, Adam, I think we are setting a new record for episode length today. I hate to do this to you, man, but I think I gotta tap out.
No, we got to talk more. We haven't talked about Justine. We haven't talked about Lara and all the White Court history.
Okay, how about this? We'll do the rest of it as a part 2, okay? Can we do a part 2?
I guess that just means the listeners are going to get another 2 hours of us talking about 12 months.
There can't possibly be 2 more hours that we could spend talking about 12 months.
Thanks for listening. Please direct any questions or topic suggestions to mac@rnt.fm. That's MAC@rnt.fm. Recorded Neutral Territory is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial 4.0.